Hi, welcome back to Lindsay Acres Farm. I'm Buddy Lindsay, and today we're going to talk about dust collection in your shop. This is super important, especially if you do a lot of woodworking, because it helps you stay safe and not dirty up your shop more than it already is going to get done. This is the Harbor Freight dust collector. I actually got it for $100 off of the Facebook Marketplace, and I think it's going to be a really good deal over some of the bigger versions that I'd like to get. This is the first video in a multi-part series over the next few months while I modify this and change things in order to get the best dust collector I can out of the Harbor Freight system. But we're only going to start with changing out the impeller and testing out the Dust Right hose to see what kind of effects we have, and we're going to switch to a single port instance instead of this Y on the intake, and I 3D printed this to kind of do what I want to do. So with that in mind, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is just test the based unit, and we're going to go with our anemometer and do the calculations so we can see how much CFM this actually gets at the table saw. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get this thing ready for our first test. So on the channel, I do have another video on setting up a Harbor Freight dust collector as a mobile station, and I did that with my dad, and I'll link up in the top corner to a video on that, so if you want to check that out. In that case, I didn't do a lot of testing of anything. We knew exactly what we wanted to do, so we made the modifications. In this case, I want to try to test it out and try to tweak things that are only going to benefit the actual flow of air, and I'm willing to throw a few ideas and things away if I don't feel like that's the right direction to go in. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to get our base CFM model. So the best airflow we're going to get is no restrictions. So this is the main intake, and in this case it's already connected. Again, I got this used off of the Facebook Marketplace for $100, so I've got to disassemble it a little bit instead of not assembling parts of it. So I want to get the base that I can get. This looks like it seems to be in a fairly good shape, like something you would get directly from Harbor Freight. So this will be an interesting exercise. So let's get this off. All right. So in this case, we've got our anemometer. I'm going to basically hold it up to this, and we're going to turn it on and see what it gets to, and then I'm going to run it through a calculator online to see what it is. This is a 5-inch hole, and so that's what we're going to base our measurements off of. All right, we got our anemometer, and we're just go ahead and reach around, turn it on. All right, so I'm gonna be a little generous, and we'll call it 90 miles per hour for that. So with that in mind, I plugged it into a calculator, and I did a, this is a 5-inch hole or ducting in port, and so we do a radius of 2.5, plug that in, this is going in and straight out there, almost no resistance, and I get a CFM of 1079. So one of the reasons that's important is because you have two types of dust or chips that are going to come out of your saw, your planer, your jointer, whatever you're doing. You have regular chips, the stuff that you see all over the place, and then you have fine dust. The chips and stuff, I mean, you can pull that up with, say, 400 CFM, 300 CFM, and you're going to be fine. To get the super fine stuff, the down to the 1 or 2 micron level, is going to be a lot harder. You need a lot more airflow, and you need about 1,000 CFM at the tool in order to pull that in effectively. That's one of the reasons that you should wear a mask whenever you're doing woodworking, because at an at-home level, we are not going to get that much of that fine dust with this system. This is just not powerful enough, because as you saw, we get 1,000 CFM at the unit with no restrictions. So now let's do a couple of other tests before we add this hose back, and we can test the Y that comes with it with one end closed off. And we can test my little custom thing that is just a 5 to 4 inch. Now, by reducing this to 4 inch, which is what this does and this does, it is going to reduce the CFM because how dust collectors works is on a shop vac, like is underneath my table saw and actually underneath this desk, it actually has a sucking motion, like it actually pulls air through. What dust collectors do is they change the air pressure inside of the system, and because it's changing the air pressure, air is now flowing through the system instead of it doing a suction motion. Kind of an interesting concept of how it works. Once you get it, it kind of makes sense. Also doesn't really matter too much. So again, let's test these out from a base. We'll plug this in, we'll test everything again, and then we will move on to replacing the impeller and see what kind of changes we get. So I just had a really nice discussion about the results and some weirdness, and made a couple of interesting points, and then I realized and found out that I did all of the math wrong. So instead of rehashing everything and trying to go through it, let's just move on, and then we'll get to the summary at the end where I will kind of pull everything together into a nice little bow. Freaking hate this thing. So another interesting result. With the anemometer, we got in just like this without a adapter on it, it was actually 61 miles per hour. But when we got an adapter on it, actually went up to say 65, 67 miles per hour. However, in the form, the CFM, the cubic feet per minute, is dependent upon the area that it goes through a hole. The base was a little over 700 CFM, but with the adapters, it dropped it down to, I think it was just a little over 500 CFM. In the case of the Y, it was 506 CFM. And in the case of my 3D printed adapter, it had a slight edge at 514 CFM. So as you can see with just this setup, we've already reduced from 1,000 CFM, a little 1,076, I think was the highest I calculated, to 500 CFM. So just at the unit, we've dropped half of our CFM. So this is definitely not going to get our fine dust collection. So we want to make sure that we get our mask on, but this should be good to actually get all of our chips out of our system. So one thing we've noticed from this is when we go from here to here, we do lose a slight amount of CFM. However, when we hit this whole thing right here, anything in here is going to reduce the CFM significantly. So what if we changed it to where this just blows directly outside and we see the CFM with that? That's going to be in an upcoming video. For now, we're just getting it set up like this. We're doing the impeller change, and we're going to test it with a hose to see what we get. So with that, let's jump into the impeller. But before that, if you've liked anything or learned anything from this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really, really helps out. So on that, let's jump to changing out this impeller. So currently I have this stretched out all the way around the fin level, way out here. In reality, there's a groove here. I should put these in, but my bearing puller is way too big. I wasn't sure which one to get, so the one that I borrowed from my father-in-law was just too big. So we're gonna go ahead and go with this, and hopefully it should work. I hope it's not in there too much. We'll see. So here we go. Here's our two impellers. This is the one that we just pulled off. Fortunately, going around the edge like I didn't bend it up at all. But here's the back. That's where they were taken out weight to even things out on the spin. And then here is the new impeller. This is the WEN Impeller. I'll leave a link in the description. But if you'll notice, and something interesting here, the fins go a different direction than this one, and it's also bigger. They both have about 6 spins. They both have 6 spins, not about. And this is a little bit bulkier, bigger. This should pull more air. Let's go ahead and get this thing on, and we will do some more tests. Might not need to do this at all because it'll just turn around and get dirty, but we're in here, so let's go ahead and do it. All right, we've got the keyway. We're gonna put that in here. And then that helps us to align the impeller so that we put it on there correctly. If you'll notice how tight that fit is going in there, but it's gonna work. Don't touch it. Wish that keyway would have stayed in there better, but I guess it is what it is. So while I put this on, I want to mention that if you notice, we're doing a couple screws here. Well, I went ahead and took this thing off and redid the impeller. It was bugging me that the keyway wasn't flush in there. So what I did instead is I used the bearing puller, same exact process that I did last time. And I took the keyway and set it inside the impeller first instead of on the shaft of the motor. Then I was able to fairly easily slide the impeller over the shaft and onto the thing. Then I put the cap back on just like normal. It's just the keyway is now definitely and directly in the body of the between the shaft and the impeller. So it's in there better. I think it would have been fine, but just in case, I went ahead, took it off, and fixed it. So it's ready to go to start testing again. I'm gonna take this pipe off, do the base test, put the pipe on, and I'm gonna disconnect it from the top so we get the maximum amount of flow that we can do. So we'll test the base, then we'll test the 2 adapters, and I'll come back with the results. Let's get to it. So I did the test with our hose connected and the bag with the filtration system on it, and we did it with the Y and the 3D printed thing that I made. So to give the results, with the hose connected, basically it was negligible. It actually went up a little bit, so there's just some variance in the testing, and it was 1127 CFM versus the 1115 with just the motor. With the filter and the bag connected, it was 827 CFM, so it didn't drop as much as the last time. So let's talk about the Y. With the Y that comes with the Harbor Freight dust collector, it was actually, again, negligible with the hose connected at 767 CFM. And then when we did the bag and the filter, it was 622 CFM. So not that much of a loss comparatively. And then when we went with the straight thing that I made, it was basically the exact same. They measured out the exact same. So after all of these tests, I think that the Y and my little thing are basically equivalent at this point. In some cases it's a little better, in some cases it's a little worse, but at this point my adapter is equivalent to keeping the Y on there. And so moving forward, I'm not going to use that Y just to save time in testing. I'm just going to keep using my 3D printed thing. All right, so I have the last couple tests to do, this time with a hose. Going to test just this one. It has my single adapter on there, and then we're going to disconnect this hose to see how it goes. And then finally, I'm going to extend this hose all the way out for one of those tests and see what the CFM is on that. So we're not just testing just it all compacted up. Let's just try to get some more understanding of what it's going to be if we were to extend this out to a tool. So this is the last test that we're going to run. This is the hose extended all the way out with the bag on the dust collector. And let's see what kind of drop we get in CFM after we run this. All right, well, that was exciting. I got one more test I want to do, but we will do that at the very, very end. First, let's summarize all the CFM and get started on that. First thing we wanted to test is we want to test a baseline. No hoses, no nothing, and no upgrades. And we got a baseline CFM of 1079. Remember, we want 1000 CFM at our machine to be able to get fine dust particles. Our 2 horsepower unit and probably a 3 horsepower unit in this situation, in this configuration, is probably not going to do that. So we want to try to get the best we can out of what we have. The main thing is we want to pick up chips. So once we upgraded and we did that base install, we got 1115 CFM. So we definitely did get an increase in CFM. One of the things to note, that new impeller is bigger, is weightier, and is going to pull more electricity because that motor has to turn it more. And it'll probably wear down that motor a little bit faster, but I mean, that's the name of the game. Was this worth a $40 or $45 impeller upgrade? Yeah, I think so. I think getting some extra strength in there and then some of the modifications that we're going to do later I think is going to help out. I do think in the end that was a good, worthwhile upgrade. The next thing that we tested was the Y versus my single out that I 3D printed. The conclusion basically was that it was negligible. Having a Y out on one side closed, and, with blast gates and all of that, had no difference between my single out port that I 3D printed. The big difference is that it went from a 5-inch to a 4-inch, and that was where our change is. And that is consistent with the stuff that I've read. Specifically, there's a guy named Bill Pence, I'll leave a link in the description, that has a huge write-up on dust collection for safety and your health and everything else, and he goes into a lot of the science of dust collection, and that just falls right in line with what he was saying. If you can get a 5-inch port all the way from your tool to the thing, you should hold a higher CFM. Unfortunately, that's just not really feasible without doing a lot of modifications, and in this particular shop, I'm not willing to do that yet. Maybe at the next shop. So after that, we put the bag on it and we're like, hey, let's see what happens. We got the CFM with no adapter to 827. So we went down from that 1115 with no bag, no nothing, hooked this hose up, put the bag on it, and we dropped nearly 300 CFM just by doing it. Again, if we'd have gone with the pleated filter, it'd add more air for that air to escape and would probably increase the CFM on that. The last test that we did, and it's kind of what everyone's going to do, is we use this hose. Something interesting about this hose, this is a ribbed hose, and it offers more opportunity for restriction to happen inside of the hose and slow air down. That's why, in the really big systems, you see these thin, smooth wall air ducts that have no 90-degree turns in them, and because that allows for better, more efficient flow of air through the system. This ribbed stuff doesn't allow for efficient airflow, and so we get what we get. So in this case, with the bag and the hose fully contracted, so it's not really, really long, we had a CFM of 387. So, I mean, that's way down from that 1015. 1,115. Once we did it with no bag, it popped it back up to about 472 CFM. So if we do like I want to do and connect this to the wall, point out the fine dust is going to go out there. If we didn't do anything else, all the dust would go outside. We'd get a CFM of 472 with the hose on it. I did one final test and I'm like, well, I have a 28-foot hose. What if I extend it 28 feet and actually get to a tool? Well, that came out to 353 CFM, which is only about a 25 CFM, no, that's not, about a 30 CFM drop from what we had. So not too bad, but it does kind of go that, hey, we started out with 1100 CFM, we changed a bunch of stuff, we did a bunch of things, and we are down to 350 CFM at the tool where we're gonna get stuff. And that doesn't include any ducting inside of the tool. So major drop, but now we know where we stand and we know where to start improving from, and we know, hey, for sure we're not going to get that fine dust, and we need to make sure we wear our masks that can get that very fine particles so we aren't breathing all that stuff in and getting health problems. All right, I have one final test, and that is I want to test the decibel level so we know how loud this thing is. I mean, if you go with a shop vac, it's pretty darn loud. So let's go ahead and test with this new improvement, with the new impeller and the bag, what is the decibel level? Here we go. So not too bad. So about 81. When I start talking, it goes up a little more. So at 81 decibels, as I understand it, we are starting to get to that line where we should put on ear protection with other stuff going. Decibel level does not have a cumulative effect, so if you run 5 different tools, it's not going to overload and add the decibels. But you are starting to hit that line that if you, that it's probably a good idea to go ahead and start wearing ear protection whenever you're running this thing. Usually your tool is going to be a little bit louder, so definitely wear your ear protection. But that's it. That is the testing of the Harbor Freight with the different modifications. Now we have a baseline for all the future modifications that we want to do to this thing, and we know where we need to improve. We have 353 CFM. We don't want to try to go below too much on that, so let's see about improving. In the next steps, I am planning on getting a cyclone of some sort because I want to hook this thing up to go outside, and I don't want everything to go outside. I want to drop it into another bin before that and then throw all the extra small crap outside. I plan to do that with a small little cyclone like a Dust Deputy Deluxe. I don't know, we'll see. I'm kind of have a secondary goal of what's the cheapest I can do this with buying stuff off of Facebook Marketplace, minus this hosing system. I wanted this specific hosing system, and I'll get to that in a future video. With that, I thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time, and let's build something together then.